Hello, everybody. All right, so here we are, another week. Let me talk about. So in the first hour today, we're going to talk about interpretation of your analysis of your data, of your experiment, whatever it is that you are in the process of researching and writing the report based on those things. Then in the second hour, we're going to talk about uh, the judging, the different ways of judging guilt and innocence in a courtroom. Because as I said, as I posted that article today, I mean, it's happened in America, and so therefore I'm aware of it, and so it's something that a lot of Americans have kept up with, but I know a lot of the world has kept up with what's been going on in regards to this particular trial and stuff like that. One thing I did want to go ahead and mention briefly as well. Let me go ahead and pull it up. I guess I should share my screen. Should share to share this. Okay. Go ahead and share. There you are. All right. So here a couple of things. I've gone ahead and taken the liberty to randomly assign the presentation time dates and presentation dates for the different groups. Now, 1, 2, 3. I put five slots on each day. 5 slots on each day, and if you want to go out of order, that's fine. I don't have a particular. I don't have I'm not devoted in any way to this particular ordering or anything. If you have an agreement with someone and you want to switch with them to a different date or time, feel free to do that. You are welcome to do that, but you need to let me know. Okay, you need to let me know so I can be aware. So if you see here, I've put all the research ones first. So what that means is these are the students who have chosen that their presentation and their long paper will be their literature review. So these students with research after their name, what I'm saying is I'm expecting you to give a presentation on your literature review. And that's what your long paper that you will submit during the final exam period. So you'll submit that long paper on your literature review during the final exam period. The other paper that you submit on May 21st will be the ethical argument. Okay. If there is something wrong with this, I need to know like immediately, like ASAP. Okay. And then for the others here from the June 2nd, June 9th. So you chose, as far as my record show, there's an echo. Okay, as far as my records show, you chose that you wanted to do the longer paper to be the ethical argument, and so therefore your final exam paper will be the longer ethical argument. Your shorter paper on May 21st will be your literature review. And here I have listed the topic that you will be presenting for your ethical argument. So, trolley problem, renewable resources, outsourcing and stuff. So like I said in the announcement, if you have the two different sides of the same topic, right, the con and the pro, like Erdinch and Meli here and Typhoon and Uyghur here, I've put you next to each other so that if you want to do a debate style like Meli and Erdinch have said that they wanted to do, I think that's a great idea, and I'm looking forward to seeing it. So I think we're all going to look forward to hearing that as well. One more thing I do want to make known is everyone's expected to attend these presentations, and one of the things that I will want you to do and I will give you is going to be a Microsoft form or perhaps a Google form, depending on if Microsoft Forms can't really do it very well, but it will be basically a way for you to document aspects about the presentation. Okay, so for you to rate the presentation. Don't worry, the other students' rating of your presentation will not be used for the grading of your presentation, but how you show that you paid attention to the other student's presentation will be used for you in your grading. Okay. Yeah, so because all 19 of you, I'm expecting you guys to have worked hard and to do a lot to understand these different topics that you're presenting to us. And because you put in a lot of work, it's respectful of us to give you our attention. It's respectful of the rest of us in the class to listen to you and give you that honor that you deserve, to be able to listen to you and pay attention to what you have to tell us. Okay. All right. So are there any questions about this before we move on? Before we move into the discussion on interpretation and writing? Okay. All right. So let's kill that and all right. So after we've done our experiment, after we have done our research, after we've done whatever type of research that we are performing, we need to be able to yeah, Mehmet Ali. So yeah, you said you're on first. Yeah. So and by the way, because that first presentation is so much earlier. I mean, that first presentation, because of the 2 holidays, that's 3 weeks before those others. I am going to use that in my grading. Okay, I'm going to use the fact that you did not have as much time to prepare as the others. I am going to use that as part of the grading. Okay, so don't think that if you go on May 5th that I'm expecting the same level of presentation as I would expect from those students who go on the 26th of May, for example. Okay. All right. I'm going to try to be as fair as I'm going to try to be as fair as possible. All right. Okay. Let's see. All right. So back to the interpretation and report writing. All right. So where did it go? That's something. That's not it. Wait, sorry, I lost something in this. Huh. Okay, so all right, so when we get our data, when we get to the place where we have a bunch of results, a bunch of data, that we need to results from experiment. And when I say results in this context, what I mean is the results from the experimentation directly. So we did X, this Y thing happened, or we interviewed, certain people and they responded in a certain way. Like those are the direct results. So that's the bulk data, the raw data. So when I say results in this context, I mean the raw data, right? And so So what we need to be able to do is we need to be able to interpret all of that data as we collect it and we analyze it and we understand what is it that we are trying to do, right? We need to be able to understand some principle that this data is helping us to understand, this abstract principle. We're trying on some level to come up with an understanding of the universe or understanding of Earth or understanding of, whatever it is, right? Whatever the topic is that we're studying, we want to be able to come up with a broad principle that is supported by the findings, right? And so we are going to use that. So once we are able to come up with that principle and establish that principle, we can have a good explanation of these concepts. We can, that's a misspelled word, appreciation. I'm gonna go change that. Appreciation of what we have learned and the way that things work, right? What these findings are and what these show. And once we interpret our data, once we interpret our results, we are able to understand also a future possibility of research as well. So oftentimes our results will lead to other future hypotheses and future work that may come out of it. So this is kind of the why, the why of the interpretation of what we're doing, and the how, right? So how is we need to be able to come up with reasonable explanations. Now, there's lots of explanations, right? There's lots of explanations that we can come up with for different things. Trying to think of some examples of where people have come up with non-reasonable explanations. Well, okay, I'll give you one. Okay, so okay, so this is kind of when I was a child, when I was young, all right, and I would ask, maybe I might ask my parents, my mom and my dad, why does it rain? Why is it raining right now? If there was a thunderstorm or something, and they would tell me, oh, it's because God is sad and he's crying, right? And so now that I'm an adult, and the thing is, my parents, they knew better. They knew that was not what causes rain. That through evaporation and condensation in the clouds and all that. That's how rain gets formed. They knew that, but they were just being, I don't know. They were just putting it down to a 4 or 5 year old level, I guess. I don't know, but the point I'm trying to make there is there's always there's a myriad of possible explanations we can come up with for something. That doesn't mean that they're all reasonable, right? And so we must be able to develop reasonable explanations. If I'm going to make a note because I just realized something, that what I meant to post on this as I was preparing for this lesson earlier. So I'm going to make a note. Is I wanted to link to what's called some like critical thinking and logical fallacy notes. As we develop our explanations for things, we need to make sure that they are logical, that they're consistent, that they are reasonable, that they account for all the pertinent facts of all the important facts. An explanation might not account for every detail, even the insignificant ones. But we do need to make sure that our explanation accounts for all the pertinent facts of all the ones that are important. Okay, if there's any extraneous information, extra stuff that seems like it might be tangential or outside of the scope of what we're studying, we should be at least willing to consider it. So, there's an outlier. Okay. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it will be necessary for inclusion in our final report, but we do need to at least be aware of it and not just throw it away. Because if we throw it away, if we think, oh, that's not important, and we just throw it away, then we could be missing something that we didn't consider before. Consultation, a good idea is to consult with experts if we don't immediately or easily understand how to understand something. And then make sure, again, that we consider all the relevant factors, and so that we don't, because remember, one of the things we're trying to do is we're trying to come up with a reasonable explanation that kind of generally understands how things work. And if we don't consider all the relevant factors, we may end up coming up with a generalization that is wrong, that's false. That can happen sometimes. And so, yeah, one of the examples of the extraneous information are just things that that may seem like, oh, that's not important, or we don't need to consider that. I was reminded of, I shared with my son, because we were talking about the vaccine and how the vaccine for the COVID virus and how the clinical trials were done and stuff like that. And I remember reading a story about where there was a media press outlet that had claimed that the vaccine, this was back during the clinical trials, this was before any vaccine was approved. And he came out and said, the headline was very clickbaity, like, oh, look at this, but it said that the vaccine causes paralysis in people's legs. And it was, whoa, that's weird, right? And then a couple of days later, it came out that one of the study's participants had started developing a paralysis in her foot. And she went to the media and said, oh, this vaccine's causing this paralysis in my foot and all this stuff. And so outside of the norm for such a type of study, I believe it may have been a double blind. It was definitely a blind study. It may have been a double blind study. But they went and they actually tracked down which version of the vaccine she had been given. And it was very interesting because, yeah. And so what it turned out was that this woman had actually been given the placebo. She was actually part of the control group that had received no vaccine at all. She had received something else, just like injecting water or whatever, whatever the control is, right? And so she had not received the vaccine at all, but yet she somehow developed paralysis. And so there's this, so now suddenly there's this question of, well, how did she develop paralysis? Did she, was it just a mental thing where she convinced herself? And so there's all these questions that came out after that. But it was interesting. But that would be a form of extraneous information that we might be tempted to just throw that out. But we at least need to acknowledge that this kind of outlier thing happened, right? And that's not to say that the vaccines couldn't have caused paralysis. I mean, we don't know, right? We're still going to be studying the side effects of this, for years to come, right? Okay. Okay. We do want to make sure that as we interpret our data, that we make sure that we verify that the data is appropriate, trustworthy, that we've gotten good data, that's not random and not bad data. All right. That it reflects a good homogeneity, and it's properly analyzed. Right, that we've done a good job of understanding, following, I want to say industry practices, industry accepted practices, but that is not industry. The community, the scientific community accepted best practices. That's the word. Best practices for analyzing data of the type that we're doing. All right. We need to be aware of potential errors. We don't, as we interpret it, we don't particularly separate it from analysis, that there can be analysis that goes on while we are interpreting. That we, at this point in the interpretation of the data, we want to don't make we don't want to make broad generalizations at this point. Right, we want to get there. We want to get to a broad understanding. Like, we want to come up with a rule basically for how things operate. But during the interpretation phase is not when we're going to do that. Right, and we want to make sure that through the process of interpretation that we are keeping connected the hypothesis, the original hypothesis, the observations that we've been making, and conceptions that we get from those observations. That we want to make sure that those things are connected throughout. Right, we don't take a hypothesis and then switch to a different topic while we're doing our observation. Right. So once we've interpreted all this data, once we've gotten it and we've analyzed it, we've interpreted it, we understand, we've gotten to a place of understanding a particular thing. Oh, I'll give you an example of broad generalization that just came to mind. So yes, you definitely want to be coherent in your interpretation, right? So the broad generalization. So months ago, I got a message, got sent a text message from a friend who said, hey, look, according to this blind study, this journal paper that's been published, it turns out masks don't have any effect on preventing the transmission of the virus, and in fact may be more damaging to people's health than not wearing the mask at all. I was like, oh wow, that's an interesting conclusion. And anytime something kind of is a conclusion that goes against what you've been hearing, yeah, that doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means, okay, for me, the way I respond is like, okay, well, let me go read the paper, right? Let me just go read the paper. Yeah. The very first thing that caught my eye was that the paper's authors in the kind of the summary of the paper section towards the beginning said, this is, there was inconclusive results and there were problems with the data collection process. It's like, oh, well, okay, that's interesting that they acknowledged that. Okay, so there we go. And then as I was reading the paper, what was interesting was what they were studying was not masks in general. What they were studying was how much did wearing a mask prevent a healthy person wearing the mask from getting the virus, right? What they were studying specifically was, did people who were healthy, who did not have the virus, did wearing a mask for them prevent them from getting the virus? And what they found was there was not a strong correlation between people wearing a mask and getting the virus or not wearing the mask and getting the virus. One of the things in the conclusion section was they said, and this is where the broad generalization comes in, it says, it would be wrong to look at this data and make a claim that masks do not have any effect. We only studied whether or not someone wearing a mask who was healthy would have a greater chance of avoiding getting infected, or would have a lesser chance of getting infected, is maybe how I should word that. Right? Which the truth was, by that point, by the time that this paper, that my friend sent it to me, it had already been kind of established by everything I had been reading, that mask wearing was more about infected individuals not giving the virus. So if I'm infected and I wear a mask, I am less likely to give it to someone else. Right? And so what my friend was doing, and I don't think he was trying to be, manipulative or lying or anything like that. But what my friend was doing was he was making a broad generalization: masks are not effective. But the paper, yeah, what, and that's probably an ethical, that could be an ethical discussion topic for sure. And but the paper did not make that claim. So the paper was doing what we're supposed to be doing, avoiding broad generalizations, right? That's exactly what they were doing. What my friend unfortunately was doing was he was making a broad generalization. So, okay, all right. Once we're done with the interpretation, we need to communicate it to others. Okay. All of our work, all of our studies, all of our experimentation has little value outside of us unless our results and findings are communicated. And we need to put them into a format that will make sense to people who did not do the research that we did. Okay. And ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to increase human knowledge and understanding. Right? So I included this that I found years ago, where it was a professor in cannot remember which university, but she was asked, what does it mean to have a PhD? What does it mean to do research? And she gave this to her incoming graduate students, and I'm going to go ahead and show it to you guys too. So imagine if we have a circle that contains all of human knowledge. When you finish elementary school, you have kind of part of that human knowledge, and then you go into high school and you expand that, and then you go to university and you get an undergraduate degree, and you expand more out of your circle, but you kind of start developing a specialty area. So, for me, this was engineering. For a lot of you, this was engineering. For some of you, it was another field, right? But this was kind of your specialty area, right? A master's degree, you keep expanding out past, in that specialty. You keep reading research papers and doing your own research, and then you reach to the edge, this edge of human knowledge, this edge of this boundary. You hit this boundary, right? And then one day the boundary gives way. So you add to that whole circle of human knowledge, right? And they call that a PhD. That's what this person calls the PhD. Right? And so, it's not about expanding this circle to be much larger than it was before. Sometimes it's just adding a little bit to the entire circle of human knowledge. Right? So if you want to read more about this professor and this, I've included this link here. Okay. All right. So as we prepare to take this pushing the boundary of human knowledge, right, and presenting that into a format that others can understand, right, we want to do our analysis. We want to create an outline. So what sections will your paper take? What types of sections will you put? What kinds of things might you put in that section? Right. So the outline should be, probably not even a more than a page or two. Right. You want to rough draft your paper. You want to these days, very few people write single author papers. You mostly write papers with other people now. And so you want to write a rough draft and have them review it. You rewrite it and polish it. You make sure you get a final bibliography. Hopefully, You will have a related work section, right? You will have a related work section in there that's going to include a lot of the state of the art for the field, right? So it really, for those of you who are preparing a thesis and the others who are preparing a doctorate thesis or dissertation, as we might call it in the States, your literature review, that's kind of like your related work, basically. Like your literature review has a little bit more than just the related work, but for many of you, as you prepare your literature review for this course, that will become a major part of your related work section of papers that you will write. Okay. All right. But these are some different sections that might be included. Now, not all of these sections are always going to be included, right? But for the most part, you'll want an introduction and a related work and a methodology, what results, finding the results, and a conclusion based on that. And many papers will have also a future work section. There's some stuff that will come through the main text of your paper, possibly. You definitely want a title and an abstract. Depending on the type of paper that you're writing, you may have a table of contents and a list of figures. And I put acknowledgments here. Right, polishing is like spell checking, grammar checking, stuff, making sure things are worded clearly, that kind of stuff. So it's once you've had a couple of drafts of it and you finally get to a point where you're saying, okay, this is a good paper, you're gonna just kind of like make it really nice and acceptable. Okay. So I include the acknowledgments here because, some of you are going to work on projects that are funded by like a Tubitalk grant or by a government grant or something like that. Many times our journals and conferences that we submit papers to will require that we acknowledge that the work was funded, by a certain grant or by a certain department, if it might get funded by a certain department of the government. Okay, so like in America, a lot of university papers, a lot of university research is funded by government contracts. Could be government, could be Department of Defense contracts where it's military. So if that's the case, you have to acknowledge that. You have to acknowledge that this was, this work was funded by, such and such department, that kind of thing. Okay. Let's see. Okay. All right. Two different types of reports. Most of us are going to be dealing in the technical report realm of showing how the study was done and what methods we used and what data we obtained and stuff like that. Popular report is another format that is talked about in the text that's more readable by the average person. So some of there's definitely some overlap. The objectives and the methods are some of the overlap here. But so there you go. Some things to consider is the format of the paper. Now I've included two links to LaTeX. One, I call it LaTeX. I know other people call it LaTeX. I'm not really sure what the correct pronunciation is. Maybe one of you can tell me. But if you have not gotten on this yet, go ahead and get there. All right, this is a very useful tool where you can basically kind of write a code kind of format for your text, where you just kind of put the text in there and it does like the automatic formatting using templates, which is really neat if you have like a paper that you want to write and you want to submit it to one journal and they have a certain format, a certain template they want you to use, and then another similar. There's some similarities. So you can use a template. So if they say we want IEEE double column format and this blah, 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 you can do that and put your text in there and it works. And then basically if, let's say it gets rejected and you want to submit it to a different conference or a different journal and they have their own template that they want you to use, you can just, import the template, don't change the text, don't change anything about the file, just use the different template. And guess what? You got a new document that's in the right template. Okay. There's also word processor templates you can use like Microsoft Word and others as well. Okay. Let's see some comments. I see you're talking about LaTeX here. Yeah. Yeah. Ever since I started using it a number of years ago, it's like, this is so much better than Microsoft Word. Okay. All right. So one final note here, some precautions, just some things to consider as you begin writing your paper. You want a length that's long enough that you adequately cover the topic. Right. You don't want it to be too long that you start losing your audience, that they start getting really bored with how long it is. But you do want it to, you don't want it so short that they think that there's a concern that you didn't put enough energy and effort into understanding the material. Okay. You want to keep it interesting. You want to engage your reader. You want to be careful to avoid abstract terminology and jargon, right? It's a lot of times, and I think, for example, here I am. I'm teaching you guys in English. For many of you, for most of you, English is a second language, or perhaps a third, even for many of you. Oh, and the truth is, I could use high, level words and stuff like what's the word? I could be verbose. That's a friend of mine talks about being verbose or things like that, right? But the main thing we want, the main goal we have is our readers. We want them to understand what we're saying, right? That's our main goal. So we need to make sure that we use terminology that is understood by the majority of the people who will be reading our work. Okay? Visual aids such as tables and charts and graphs are definitely encouraged, right? And that we think about our layout really well. Okay. We don't want grammar mistakes or misspellings. That's a bad thing. And so, in this day and age, when you have Microsoft Word and Google Docs that puts that nice red underline under things that are not spelled correctly, that's a good thing. And then we want to make sure that we communicate that we have done a thorough logical analysis and we show that we have some originality in there. Right? And we want to discuss possible future implications. How can this work be used in the future? And one big thing at the end that we have to always include is a bibliography and an index. If an index, if it's a lengthier paper, like if it's a lengthier book level paper or dissertation, that kind of thing. But a bibliography is definitely required for even our journal papers, right? Even our journal and conference papers. Okay. All right. So I kind of ran up on time here. So what's any questions, comments before we take our break, and we'll come back and we'll have our second hour discussion. Nope. All right, guys. Well, let's do this. Let's take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 2:25 and we will have the second discussion of the day. All right, I'll see you in 10 minutes.